The mist clung to the cobblestones like a lover's reluctant farewell, weaving through the narrow alleys of Eldridge Hollow where the lanterns flickered like dying stars. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and wood smoke, undercut by the faint metallic tang of fear that seemed to seep from the very stones. In this forgotten corner of the human world, where the wild forests pressed against the village's edges like an unspoken threat, Elara moved like a shadow among shadows. She had been here for 3 moons, blending into the rhythm of the mundane, fetching water from the well at dawn, mending nets for the fishermen who never looked too closely at her pale skin, or the way her eyes caught the light like fractured moonlight. Her hands, calloused from years of hiding, gripped the worn basket as she hurried toward the market square. The villagers bustled around her, their voices a low hum of bartering and gossip, oblivious to the tremor in her step. But Elara felt it always, that pull beneath her skin, the moon mark hidden beneath the high collar of her threadbare dress, a silvery crescent that burned like ice when the nights grew long. It had been born in blood, that mark, a gift from her mother's dying breath in the shadowed glens of the lupine wilds, where the packs roamed free under the eternal hunt. Elara was no ordinary shifter. She was the last of the moonbound, cursed to bear the weight of ancient prophecies that whispered of a queen who would either unite the fractured clans or shatter them into eternal night. But prophecies were chains, and she had fled them all. The snarling alphas, the ritual fires, the howls that echoed her name across the windswept moors. Here among humans, she was just Elara the orphan, scraping by on stolen moments of peace. The square teemed with life, merchants hawking withered apples and spiced bread, children darting between legs like feral pups, and the blacksmith's hammer ringing out a steady dirge. Elara bartered for a loaf, her voice soft and measured, eyes downcast. But as she turned to slip away, a ripple passed through the crowd, a hush that fell like frost. Heads turned toward the eastern road, where dust rose in lazy spirals, heralding riders. They came on steeds as black as midnight oil, cloaks billowing like raven wings. At their head rode a figure that seemed carved from the storm itself, tall, broad-shouldered, with hair the color of storm clouds tied back in a warrior's braid. His eyes, sharp and golden as a predator's, scanned the square with the weight of command. Thorn Blackthorn, alpha king of the lupine clans. Whispers slithered through the villages like serpents, rumors of border skirmishes, of beasts prowling too close to human lands, of a king seeking something lost in the wilds. Elara's heart stuttered, a wild drumbeat against her ribs. She ducked behind a cart piled with turnips, breath shallow, the basket forgotten at her feet. How had he come here? The wilds were days away, separated by rivers swollen with spring melt and wards woven by elder druids. Yet there he was, dismounting with a grace that belied his power, his boots thudding against the earth like the first toll of doom. His men fanned out, questioning the elders with low, urgent tones, but Thorn stood still, nostrils flaring as if tasting the air. The wind shifted, carrying her scent, faint, wild, laced with the pine and frost of her hidden heritage. Elara pressed her back against the cart's splintered wood, fingers digging into the rough grain until splinters bit her skin. Pain grounded her, a sharp reminder to breathe, to remain unseen. But the mark on her collarbone throbbed, a living pulse that synced with the distant call of the moon, still hidden behind the grey veil of clouds. Thorn's gaze swept the square, lingering on faces, on the flicker of fear in strangers' eyes. He was no mere warlord. Legend spoke of him as the unbreakable, the one who had clawed his way to the throne through rivers of blood during the Great Schism. His own mark, a jagged scar across his jaw, gleamed like forged iron, a testament to battles won and kin lost. Yet beneath the king's iron facade lay a restlessness, a hollow ache from the prophecy that haunted his dreams. The moonbound's return, the one who could heal the clan's wounds or rend them asunder. A villager, old Marta with her rheumy eyes, approached him hesitantly, offering a cup of ale. "My lord, what brings the wild winds to our door?" Her voice trembled, but curiosity burned brighter. Thorn accepted the cup, his large hand dwarfing it, but his eyes never stopped searching. "A shadow moves in these lands," he rumbled, voice like gravel underfoot. "One that does not belong. Have you seen a woman? Pale as birch, with eyes like storm-lit skies?" Marta shook her head, but Elara felt the lie in the air before it formed. The old woman had glimpsed her once, bathing in the stream, the mark catching the sunlight like a forbidden sigil. Panic clawed at Elara's throat. She edged away, heart pounding, but the alley was too narrow, the crowd too thick. A child bumped into her, spilling a basket of herbs that scattered like accusations at her feet. Thorn's head snapped toward the sound. Their eyes met across the square, his golden stare piercing the chaos, locking onto her with the unerring focus of a hunter scenting prey. Time fractured. The world narrowed to that gaze, raw and unrelenting, stripping away her human guise. He saw it then, or sensed it. The flicker of wildness in her posture, the way her breath hitched like a wolf's wary pant. And beneath the collar, though hidden, the mark sang to him, a silent howl across the divide. Elara bolted, her skirts tangled around her legs as she shoved through the throng, elbows jabbing, breaths coming in ragged gasps. Shouts erupted behind her, his men giving chase, boots pounding like thunder. The forest loomed at the village's edge, its ancient boughs whispering promises of cover. But the mark burned hotter now, a beacon drawing him inexorably closer. She crashed into the underbrush, branches whipping her face, drawing thin lines of blood that mingled with tears she refused to shed. The wilds called to her, but so did the king, a force of destiny she had fled for so long. In the gathering dusk, as his howl echoed through the trees, Elara realized the hiding was over. The moon would rise, and with it, the truth she could no longer bury. The forest swallowed her whole, its gnarled roots snaking across the path like the veins of some ancient slumbering beast. Elara's lungs burned with each frantic breath, the air heavy with the musk of moss and decaying leaves, a scent that twisted her gut with unwelcome familiarity. Thorns tore at her skirts, snagging the fabric like greedy fingers, but she pressed on, weaving through the undergrowth where the trees grew thickest, their branches interlocking overhead to form a canopy that choked out the fading light. The village's clamor faded behind her, replaced by the rustle of unseen creatures and the distant ominous crack of twigs under pursuit. Her mark pulsed like a second heartbeat, hot and insistent against her skin, as if the moon itself were urging her deeper into the wilds. It had always been this way, a tether to the pack she had abandoned, a reminder of the power she dared not unleash. In the lupine wilds they called it the Luna's Kiss, a blessing for some, a curse for the unbound like her. It granted visions in the dead of night, whispers of futures yet unwoven, but it also drew the predators. Alpha's hungry for her bloodline to claim the throne's fractured legacy, and now Thorn Blackthorn himself hunted her, his presence a storm cloud rolling inexorably closer. She stumbled over a fallen log, moss slick beneath her palms as she caught herself, the impact jarring her bones. Blood trickled from a gash on her knee, warm and sticky, mingling with the earth. For a moment she paused, ears straining. The howls had ceased, but that meant nothing. He was too cunning for crude baying. Thorn moved like the wind through the pines, silent and lethal, his senses attuned to the subtlest shifts in the air. Elara wiped her face with a trembling hand, tasting salt on her lips. Tears or sweat she couldn't tell. Why now? Why here? In this fragile sanctuary she had carved from human indifference. Pushing to her feet, she darted toward a cluster of boulders half buried in ferns, their surfaces etched with runes long faded by time. This was the borderland, where the human wards thinned and the wild magic seeped through like fog from a grave. She squeezed into a crevice, the stone cold and unyielding against her back, her body curling small as a frightened cub. The mark throbbed in rhythm with her fear, sending flickers of light beneath her collar, pale, ethereal, like starlight trapped in ice. She clamped a hand over it, willing it to still, but the effort only amplified the ache, a deep, resonant pull that echoed the loneliness she had buried beneath layers of pretense. Memories clawed their way to the surface unbidden, her mother's final shift under the blood moon, fur rippling across her skin as she pressed the mark into Elara's flesh with a claw-tipped finger. "You are the bridge, child," she had gasped, eyes glazing with the void. "Between pact and prophecy, hide until the king proves worthy, or falls." Elara had run then, a girl of 14 summers, leaving the wild's ritual flames and the alpha's grasping hands. Years of evasion followed, nomad camps, shadowed cities, always one step ahead of the hunters. But Thorn was different. The tales painted him as a savior forged in fire, the Alpha King who had ended the schism's endless wars, only to inherit a realm teetering on oblivion. What did he seek in her? Alliance, or the final piece to cement his rule? A low growl rumbled through the trees, vibrating the air like thunder trapped in the earth. Elara's breath hitched, her pulse roaring in her ears. He was close. Too close. She peered through the crevice, the forest a blur of twilight shadows, and there, silhouetted against the dying sun, he emerged. Thorn moved with predatory grace, his cloak blending with the encroaching dusk, the scar on his jaw catching the last rays like molten silver. His men hung back at the tree line, respecting the boundary of his hunt, but his golden eyes fixed on her hiding place with unnerving precision. He inhaled deeply, nostrils flaring, and Elara knew he scented her. The wild tang of her fear, the subtle bloom of her mark's magic. "You can't run forever, Moonbound," his voice carried deep and resonant, laced with a weariness that surprised her. It wasn't the triumphant roar of a conqueror, but something rawer, edged with the same isolation she felt gnawing at her core. He stepped closer, boots silent on the leaf-strewn ground, his presence filling the glade like a gathering storm. "The pacts fracture without you. The shadows at our borders grow bolder, vampiric hordes from the eastern crags, whispering of your return as their doom." Elara pressed deeper into the rock, the stone biting into her shoulders, but curiosity warred with terror. He knew her name, or the title it implied. How? The prophecies were guarded by the elder seers, locked in crystal vaults deep within the wilds. She risked a whisper, barely audible, testing the waters. "And what if I'm no savior? What if I bring only ruin?" Thorn paused, his head tilting as if catching the faint words on the wind. A flicker of something. Pain crossed his features, softening the hard lines of his face. He knelt then, a gesture of unlikely vulnerability, his massive frame folding with deliberate care. "Then we fall together," he replied, a voice softening to a rumble like distant waves. "But I have seen the visions too. The mark calls to mine." He touched the scar on his jaw, and Elara glimpsed it then, a faint, mirroring crescent hidden beneath, pulsing faintly in sync with hers. The revelation struck her like a blow. He was marked too. No alpha bore the Luna's dual sign. It was forbidden, a twist of fate that could unmake the hierarchies. Her hand slipped from her collar, the mark flaring brighter, casting a silvery glow that spilled from her hiding spot. Thorn's eyes widened, locking onto the light, and for a heartbeat the forest held its breath. No longer hunter and prey, but two threads of the same unraveling tapestry, drawn inexorably together. But trust was a luxury Elara couldn't afford. As his men stirred at the edge of the glade, drawn by the unnatural light, she seized the moment. Channeling the mark's wild energy, she pushed against the stone, a surge of strength propelling her through the crevice and into the denser woods beyond. Branches lashed her arms, drawing fresh blood, but she ran, the king's voice echoing behind her, a plea wrapped in command. "Elara, wait!" The night deepened, stars pricking the canopy like wary eyes, and the mark burned with newfound purpose. Hiding among humans had been her cage. Now, the wilds beckoned, promising answers amid the thorns. Yet as Thorn's distant howl rose again, mournful and unyielding, Elara wondered if destiny's chains could ever truly break, or if they merely bound her to him. The underbrush clawed at Elara's ankles like the desperate grasp of forgotten souls, each step a betrayal of the fragile peace she had clung to. The forest's heart pulsed around her, alive with the nocturnal symphony of rustling leaves and the distant hoot of an owl, its call a mournful echo of her own unraveling resolve. Moonlight filtered through the canopy and fractured shafts, painting the ground in silver veins that mirrored the throb of her mark, a relentless rhythm syncing with the wild beat of her heart. Sweat beaded on her brow, cooling in the chill night air, carrying the faint, earthy scent of her exertion mingled with the sharper tang of blood from her torn skin. She didn't know how far she had run, only that the glade's confrontation lingered like a brand on her mind. Thorn's voice, that gravelly plea laced with unexpected vulnerability, reverberated in her ears, chasing away the silence she sought. He bore the mark too, a twin flame to her curse, hidden beneath the warrior's scar. The implications twisted in her gut like a knife, no longer alone in her isolation, but entangled with the very king whose shadow had haunted her dreams. Was it fate's cruel jest, binding the prophesied queen to the throne's unyielding master, or a deeper weave, pulling her toward the pacts she had forsaken? Her foot caught on a root hidden in the gloom, and she tumbled forward, palms scraping against loam-rich soil that yielded like flesh under her weight. Pain flared in her wrists, sharp and grounding, but it was the mark's surge that stole her breath, a wave of heat radiating from her collarbone, igniting visions unbidden. In the haze of her mind's eye, she saw flashes. Thorn as a young alpha, bloodied in the schism's fray, his first shift under an eclipse moon, where the lunar's light etched the crescent into his flesh, not a blessing but a wound, mirroring her mother's dying gift. He too had hidden it, fearing it would unravel his claim to power, make him seem tainted by the very prophecy he was destined to fulfill or defy. Elara pushed herself up, dirt caking her fingers, the metallic taste of blood on her lip from where she had bitten it to stifle a cry. The forest seemed to close in, branches whispering secrets in the wind, their leaves brushing her arms like spectral fingers. She needed shelter, a moment to stem the mark's wild call before it betrayed her fully. Ahead, through the tangle of ferns, loomed the remnants of an ancient oak, its trunk split by lightning long ago, forming a hollow cavernous enough to shield her from the stars' prying gaze. She crawled inside, the bark rough and splintered against her back, enclosing her in a womb of damp wood and fungal earth. The scent was primal, mushroom rot and hidden water, a reminder of the wild's indifferent embrace. Curled there, knees drawn to her chest, Elara allowed the tremors to take hold. Solitude had been her armor, forged in years of flight from the wild's ritual circles where alphas vied for her hand in blood-soaked ceremonies. She remembered the first hunt after her mother's passing, shadows in the mist, fangs glinting as they scented her unbound power, but Thorn. His golden eyes had held no hunger, only a recognition that pierced her defenses. "We fall together," he had said, and the words echoed now, stirring a forbidden ache in her chest, a longing for connection amid the prophecy's cold chains. The mark warmed under her touch, no longer burning but humming softly, like a lullaby from the moon's distant cradle. It granted her glimpses, not just of him, but of the fractures in the clans. Packs splintering under vampiric incursions from the crags, elders whispering of the moonbound's absence as the harbinger of doom. Elara's breath steadied, the introspection a fragile respite from the chase. Yet even here, safety was illusion. A low snarl rippled through the undergrowth, freezing her blood. Not Thorn's men, these were wilder, unbound by loyalty. The forest's guardians stirred, drawn by the mark's ethereal glow seeping from her hiding place like a lantern in the void. Eyes gleamed in the darkness, pairs of amber and green, circling the oak with predatory patience. Shadow wolves, remnants of the old magic, twisted by the borderland's thinning wards. Larger than their earthly kin, their fur matted with thorns and midnight dew, they moved as one, a pack without alpha. Driven by instinct to cull the unnatural. Elara's heart raced, the mark flaring in response, urging her to shift, to embrace the beast within and meet them fang to fang. But shifting meant surrender, a step toward the destiny she fled, where her human guise dissolved into fur and fury. The first wolf lunged, jaws snapping at the hollow's edge, its breath hot and fetid, reeking of carrion and rage. Elara scrambled back, pressing against the oak's innards, her nails digging into the wood until they splintered. Fear coiled tight, but so did resolve, a spark of the power she had repressed. She whispered an invocation from her mother's fragmented teachings, the words tasting of ash and starlight. "Lunar God, bind the storm." The mark blazed, sending a pulse of silver light outward, a barrier of woven moonlight that shimmered like frost on glass. The wolf yelped, recoiling as the energy singed its muzzle, fur smoking faintly. Its packmates hesitated, whining in confusion, the light revealing their scarred hides, marks of battles against encroaching darkness. But the effort drained her, the mark's glow dimming as exhaustion seeped into her bones. She slumped, vision blurring, the wolves regrouping with renewed snarls. In that vulnerable haze, a deeper howl pierced the night, not the shadows, but Thorn's, closer now, a thunderous call that shook the leaves from their perches. He was coming, his presence a double-edged blade, savior or captor, ally or chain. The wolves scattered at the sound, tails low, vanishing into the gloom as if commanded by a greater force. Elara emerged from the hollow on trembling legs, the forest floor soft underfoot, dew kissing her skin like tears. The mark pulsed once more, a gentle tug northward, toward the wild's heart, where answers and perils awaited. She could run still, vanish into the human fringes once more, but the revelation of their shared curse gnawed at her. Destiny wasn't a solitary path, it was a bridge, fragile and fraught, demanding sacrifice. As Thorn's silhouette crested a ridge in the distance, his form etched against the rising moon, Elara stood her ground for the first time. The wind carried his scent, pine, iron, and unspoken longing, and in it, the fragile hope that falling together might mean rising anew. Yet as he approached, sword sheathed, but eyes alight with feral intensity, doubt flickered like dying embers. The pack's fractures ran deep, and her return could ignite war or weave peace. The mark sang of possibility, but her heart whispered of loss, the innocence of hiding, the solitude she had mistaken for freedom. Thorn halted paces away, breath visible in the cooling air, his voice a low rumble that bridged the chasm between them. "The shadows flee you, moonbound, as do I, if you command it, but the night grows darker without us bound." Elara met his gaze, the silver of her eyes reflecting his gold, two crescents aligning under the watchful moon. The choice loomed, heavy as the forest's ancient weight, and in that suspended breath she felt the stirrings of transformation, not in fur or fang, but in the quiet forging of trust amid the thorns. The moon hung low, a sickle of bone-white light, slicing through the canopy's ragged edges, casting elongated shadows that danced like wary spectres across the forest floor. Elara's breath misted in the crisp air, each exhale a fragile thread, weaving between the pines' solemn vigil. The scent of damp bark and crushed ferns clung to her, mingling with the coppery undercurrent of her own blood, a reminder of the thorns that had marked her flight. Thorn stood before her, his silhouette a monolith of restrained power, the scar along his jaw catching the lunar glow like a vein of quicksilver. His golden eyes held hers, not with the conqueror's fire, but a tempered flame, patient, probing, as if peering into the chasms she had long concealed. The wind whispered through the branches, carrying the faint rustle of retreating leaves, but the world narrowed to the space between them, mere paces, yet vast as the divide between wild and tame. Elara's mark thrummed beneath her skin, a harmonic resonance with his hidden twin, pulling at her like an unseen tide. She could still flee, melt into the undergrowth, let the borderlands' mists swallow her once more, but her feet rooted to the earth, heavy with the weight of unspoken truths. "Why reveal it now?" she murmured, her voice a threadbare veil over the tremor within. "The pacts would tear you from the throne if they knew." Thorn's lips curved in a shadow of a smile, weary and edged with old wounds. He unclasped his cloak, letting it fall to the leaf-strewn ground in a whisper of wool, revealing the broad expanse of his chest where the leather vest parted just enough to expose the crescent scar pulsing faintly against his olive skin. It mirrored hers in cruel symmetry, etched not by claw or fang, but by the moon's unforgiving kiss during his ascension rite. "Because hiding devours the soul," he replied, his tone gravel rough, laced with the echo of solitary nights. "I claimed the throne on blood and broken oaths, Elara. The schism left the clans in shards, alphas scheming in the crags, betas whispering of weakness. This mark, it branded me unfit, a king shadowed by prophecy, but it also showed me you, in dreams, in the lunar's silver haze." She stepped closer, drawn against her will, the air between them thickening with the primal musk of his presence, earth and storm, undercut by the subtle wildness that mirrored her own. Her fingers hovered near his chest, not touching, but feeling the heat radiate like a forge's dying embers. Visions flickered at the edges of her sight, unbidden gifts from the mark, flashes of his past, the boy alpha orphaned in the schism's flames, shifting alone under an eclipse where the moon wept silver tears into his flesh. Pain, isolation, the relentless drive to unite what fate had sundered. Empathy stirred in her chest, a fragile bloom amid the thorns of distrust. "My mother said the moon-bound bridges worlds," Elara whispered, her pale hand finally brushing the edge of his mark. It flared under her touch, sending a jolt through them both, a shared spark that tasted of pine resin and forgotten howls. "But bridges can burn. What do you want from me, King? My blood to seal your rule? My power to crush the shadows?" His hand captured hers gently, calluses rough as weathered stone against her softer skin, holding without force. The contact grounded her, the marks hum deepening to a resonant chord that vibrated through her bones. "Not your submission," he said, voice dropping to a rumble that stirred the leaves at their feet. "Your truth." The vampiric hordes press from the east, their mist wraith slipping through the wards like poison. They sense the fracture, the pacts without a true queen, a realm without balance. "I fought alone, Elara, but the mark calls for two. Join me, not as pawn, but as equal. Or walk away and let the wilds claim us both in pieces." The forest seemed to hold its breath, the distant trickle of a stream the only sound piercing the tension. Elara's mind raced, memories surfacing like ghosts, the ritual fires of her youth, alphas circling with eyes hungry for dominion. Her mother's final gasp, warning of the king's unyielding grasp. Yet here was no tyrant, but a man forged in the same crucible of curse, his golden gaze reflecting her own buried longing, for pact, for purpose beyond endless flight. Sacrifice loomed in his words, the cost of binding their fates, her freedom for the clan's fragile hope, his throne for the risk of shared ruin. Before she could answer, a guttural snarl shattered the fragile truce. From the gloom beyond the ridge, eyes ignited like embers, more shadow wolves, emboldened by the borderland's thinning veil, their forms twisting unnaturally in the moonlight. These were no mere guardians. Corruption laced their pelts, veins of black ichor pulsing beneath fur, matted with vampiric taint. The lead beast, larger than the rest, lips curling over fangs, dripping viscous shadow, lunged from the underbrush, its pack fanning out in a semicircle of feral intent. They had scented the mark's convergence, drawn like moths to the flame of unbound power. Thorn moved first, a blur of motion as he drew his sword, the blade singing free with a metallic keen that cut the night. "Stay behind me," he growled, positioning his body as shield, but Elara's mark ignited in defiance, silver light coiling up her arms like living vines. No longer hiding, she stepped forward, the energy surging through her veins, a wild, intoxicating rush that blurred the line between human fear and lupine fury. "We face this together," she said, voice steadying as the power awakened, her nails lengthening to claws that gleamed like pearl. The alpha wolf struck, jaws clamping toward Thorn's throat, but he parried with a sweep of steel, the clash ringing like thunder. Elara channeled the mark's gift, whispering the invocation once more, but amplified now by their proximity. Moonlight wove from her palms, lashing out in tendrils that ensnared the beast mid-leap, binding it in shimmering chains that burned away the ichor. It howled, a sound of unraveling darkness, thrashing as the corruption smoked and peeled. The pack faltered, whining, but pressed on, claws raking the earth, shadows coiling like serpents. Thorn fought with brutal grace, his blade carving through fur and void, blood dark and oily, splattering the ground. A wolf barreled into his side, fangs grazing his arm, drawing a hiss of pain that twisted Elara's gut. Rage flared within her, the mark pulsing in sync with his, and she shifted partially, not full beast, but hybrid fury, eyes silvering, strength coiling as she tore into the fray. Her claws raked a flank, silver light searing the taint, while Thorn's roar shook the trees, driving back the assault. Together, they dismantled the pack, the last wolf fleeing into the mist with a final echoing yelp. Panting, bloodied, they stood amid the carnage, the forest reclaiming the fallen with creeping vines. Thorn's wound wept crimson, but his eyes met hers with newfound respect, the shared mark glowing faintly, a bridge forged in battle's fire. "You are no fragile oracle," he breathed, sheathing his sword with a trembling hand. "The moonbound lives in you, as the king in me falters without." Elara nodded, the adrenaline ebbing into a profound ache, the loss of her solitary veil, the birth of alliance's weight. The moon watched, impassive, as they bandaged wounds by starlight, the air thick with unspoken vows. Dawn's first blush crept over the horizon, painting the leaves in hues of rose and gold, a symbolic rebirth amid the thorns. Yet as they turned toward the wild's distant call, Elara felt the prophecy's shadow lengthen. Unity demanded more than trust. It craved sacrifice, and the clan's fractures awaited like open graves. In Thorn's steady gaze, she glimpsed hope's fragile light, but also the cost etched in their joined scars. The first light of dawn bled through the trees like a hesitant wound, gilding the forest floor in strokes of amber and rose, where the remnants of the shadow wolves lay scattered, twisted forms dissolving into wisps of black smoke that curled upward like dying prayers. Elara knelt beside Thorn, her fingers deft but trembling as she tore strips from her already ragged hem to bind his arm. The air hung heavy with the acrid tang of scorched ichor and fresh blood, mingling with the earthy perfume of dew-kissed moss. His skin was fever-hot under her touch, the crescent mark on his chest pulsing faintly, a silver thread connecting to the one hidden beneath her own collar, now exposed and raw from the night's frenzy. Thorn watched her with those golden eyes, softened by exhaustion, the hard lines of his face etched deeper by the wound's sting. No words passed between them at first, only the shared rhythm of laboured breaths and the distant trill of waking birds, as if the wilds themselves paused to witness this fragile forging. She tied the knot with care, her knuckles brushing his pulse point, and felt the mark respond, a warm hum that spread through her veins like liquid moonlight, easing the ache in her own gashes. It was no mere scar. It was a bridge, alive and insistent, whispering of destinies intertwined beyond choice. "We press on," Thorn murmured at last, his voice a low gravel that stirred the leaves at their feet. He rose slowly, testing the arm with a flex that drew a hiss through clenched teeth, but his stance was unyielding, a king's resolve, cloaked in vulnerability. Elara stood beside him, the forest's chill seeping through her torn dress, raising gooseflesh along her arms. The wilds lay ahead, a shadowed expanse beyond the borderland's veil, where the pack's howls would greet, or condemn, their return. She nodded, the motion heavy, for each step pulled her further from the human world's numb anonymity into the prophecy's maw. They moved northward through the thinning woods, the path a faint game trail worn by generations of unseen beasts, flanked by ancient sentinels of oak and yew, whose branches arched overhead like cathedral vaults. The sun climbed higher, filtering through the canopy in dappled patterns that played across Thorn's braided hair, turning strands to threads of burnished gold. Elara walked at his side, not behind, her steps syncing with his despite the disparity in their strides. Her lithe form a counterpoint to his towering frame. Silence wove between them, broken only by the crunch of underfoot and the occasional sigh of wind through the boughs, carrying scents of pine resin and distant rain. As the morning wore on, the mark's hum deepened, granting fragmented visions that flickered at the edges of Elara's sight. The Lupine clan's heartlands, where ritual stones stood sentinel around flickering council fires, alphas circling with eyes narrowed in suspicion. She glimpsed betrayal in the shadows, betas whispering of the king's tainted mark, alliances fracturing like brittle bone under the weight of old grudges from the schism, and threading through it all, the vampiric hordes, pale figures shrouded in mist, their eyes like voids, encroaching from the eastern crags with whispers of dominion. The mark showed her role, not as savior alone, but as catalyst, her presence igniting the clan's latent fury or their unlikely unity. Thorn sensed her unease, his gaze flicking to her face. "The visions come stronger now, don't they?" he asked, his tone laced with quiet understanding, as if he too navigated the same spectral currents. They paused at a stream's edge, the water clear and murmuring over smooth pebbles, reflecting the sky's deepening blue. He knelt to refill their waterskins, the motion fluid despite his injury, muscles coiling beneath his vest like a predator at rest. Elara dipped her hands into the current, the cold bite shocking her skin, washing away the night's grime in rivulets of pink-tinged clarity. "They show fractures," she replied, voice soft as the ripple of water, meeting his eyes over the stream's glassy divide. "Your throne wavers, Thorn. Alphas like Grimfang in the northern moors plot in the dark, seeing my return as weakness, a queen unbound to challenge your rule. And the vampires, they hunger for the chaos we've stirred." Her words hung between them, heavy with the melancholy of inevitable loss. She had hidden to escape this, to spare the world her cursed light, but now it burned brighter, demanding she embrace the power that terrified her. He straightened, water dripping from his hands like tears unshed, and closed the distance in 2 strides. His fingers grazed her cheek, rough yet tender, tracing the line of a thorn's scratch that wept a thin bead of blood. The touch ignited the marks anew, a cascade of warmth that blurred the boundaries of self, her solitude yielding to the ache of shared burden. "Let them plot," he said, his breath warm against her temple, carrying the faint spice of wild herbs from his travels. "The schism taught me that thrones are built on blood, not blind loyalty, but with you. The prophecy shifts, not ruin, Elara, but renewal. I've walked alone too long, the mark a silent torment, echoing your absence." Emotions swelled in her chest. A tide of impossible longing mingled with fear, the tenderness of his gaze a balm against the violence she knew awaited. She leaned into his hand, just for a breath, the forest fading to a hush around them. Yet sacrifice loomed, unspoken. To bind with him meant surrendering her elusive freedom, stepping into the clan's fray, where love could become weapon or wound. "And if I can't be the bridge," she whispered, pulling back slightly, the stream's chill mirroring the doubt in her veins. "If the power consumes us both?" Before he could answer, the air thickened with an unnatural frost. The stream's surface icing over in jagged fractals that cracked like breaking bones. A low hiss slithered from the tree line, and mist uncoiled like serpents from the east. Vampiric scouts, ethereal and gaunt, their skin translucent as moonlit fog, eyes burning with crimson hunger. 3 of them emerged, cloaks of shadow billowing, fangs glinting as they circled the clearing with predatory grace. The border wards had failed here, thinned by the night's chaos, allowing the taint to seep through. Thorn's sword cleared its sheath in a silver arc, his body shifting instinctively to guard her flank, a growl rumbling from his throat like thunder trapped in stone. Elara's mark flared, silver light coiling up her arms, transforming fear into resolve. The lead vampire lunged, claws extended like obsidian blades, but she met it with a surge of lunar energy, tendrils lashing out to ensnare its form. It shrieked, the sound a piercing wail that shattered nearby branches, the light searing its ethereal flesh into wisps of acrid smoke. Thorn carved through the second, his blade biting deep, black ichor spraying across the stream like ink in water. The third feinted toward Elara, but he intercepted, taking a rake across his already bandaged arm that tore fresh agony through him. She countered with a partial shift, claws extending, eyes silvering, as she raked the creature's side, the mark's power amplifying her strike until it dissolved in a howl of unraveling mist. Panting, they stood amid the fading echoes, the frost retreating under the sun's insistent climb. Thorn's blood dripped into the stream, staining it briefly before the current carried it away, a symbolic washing of battle's toll. Elara pressed a hand to his new wound, the mark sinking once more, channeling healing warmth that knit the flesh with a soft glow. In his eyes she saw the depth of their bond, violence yielding to tenderness, the impossible love blooming amid sacrifice's thorns. As they resumed their path, the wild's distant howls rose on the wind, a chorus of challenge and call. The prophecy's climax neared, demanding they face the clan's judgment together, where inner power would be tested in fire. Elara walked closer to him now, their shoulders brushing, the melancholy of loss tempered by hope's quiet rebirth. Yet in the mark's deepening hum, she felt the cost, a heart laid bare, destinies entwined, and the shadow of greater trials looming like storm clouds on the horizon. The wilds unfurled before them like a living tapestry of shadow and sinew, where the trees twisted into colossal guardians, their bark etched with runes that glowed faintly under the midday sun's reluctant gaze. Elara's boots sank into the loamy earth, each step releasing the pungent aroma of fermented leaves and hidden fungi, a scent that clawed at memories long buried. The air hummed with the undercurrent of pack life, distant howls weaving through the branches like threads of fate, calling her home, even as dread coiled in her belly. Thorn walked beside her, His presence a steady anchor amid the encroaching wildness, the fresh bandage on his arm a stark white against his sun-bronzed skin, already flecked with the pollen of blooming nightshade. The marks thrummed in unison now, a constant undercurrent that blurred the edges of their solitude, drawing visions that flickered like half-remembered dreams, the heart of the lupine clans. A vast clearing ringed by standing stones, worn smooth by centuries of ritual blood. Alphas gathered there, their forms shifting restlessly between man and beast, eyes gleaming with suspicion and hunger. Grimfang's silhouette loomed largest, his pelt scarred from old betrayals, whispering poison into the ears of lesser packs about the king's tainted alliance with the moon-bound fugitive. The vampire's shadow lingered at the fringes, their mist seeping through the wards like insidious veins, promising oblivion if the clans failed to unite. Elara's breath caught as the first sentinels appeared, lone wolves patrolling the tree line, their amber eyes locking onto the intruders with wary intelligence. They didn't attack, but their low growls vibrated through the ground, a warning etched in primal sound. Thorn raised a hand, his voice rumbling like thunder trapped in his chest. "We come as one," he declared, the words carrying the weight of command, laced with the mark's subtle magic that rippled outward, sinking with the pack's latent bonds. The wolves hesitated, nostrils flaring at the dual scent of their marks, then melted back into the undergrowth, tails low in reluctant deference. Yet the introspection that followed gnawed deeper than any fang. Elara glanced at Thorn, his profile etched against the dappled light, the scar on his jaw a map of losses she now shared. "This path ends in fire," she said softly, her voice mingling with the rustle of wind through thorn vines that snagged at her skirts like grasping doubts. "The clans won't bow to a queen who hid among humans. They'll see weakness, not strength. And you, binding to me, risks everything you've bled for." The words tasted of ash, her solitude fracturing under the impossible pull of their connection, a love forged in pursuit and peril, tender yet laced with the melancholy of what it demanded. He stopped, turning to face her fully, his golden eyes reflecting the fractured canopy above. The forest seemed to hush, birds falling silent as if witnessing a vow unspoken. "Sacrifice is the throne's shadow, Elara," he replied, his hand finding hers, calluses rough against her palm, igniting the marks into a warm blaze that chased the chill from her bones. "I've lost kin, packs, pieces of myself to the schism's hunger. But you're the light it couldn't devour. The prophecy isn't chains. It's the power we've both repressed. Together, we reclaim it, or the vampires feast on our divided bones." Emotions surged. A tide of hope mingled with the ache of impending loss. The girl who hid would die here, reborn in the crucible of destiny. She squeezed his hand, the contact a spark that sent silver threads of energy dancing between their fingers, illuminating the hidden crescents like twin stars aligned. For a moment, tenderness bloomed amid the thorns, his thumb tracing her knuckles, her head resting briefly against his shoulder, inhaling the storm scent of him, wild and unwavering. But the wilds brooked no illusions. As they crested the final ridge, the heartlands sprawled below, a vast amphitheater of ancient stone, ringed by flickering bonfires that cast elongated shadows across the gathered packs. Hundreds of eyes turned toward them, a sea of amber and silver glinting with feral curiosity and barely restrained hostility. Grimfang stepped forward from the throng, his massive form shifting partially to hybrid menace, claws extended, fur rippling along his arms, lips curling over fangs in a snarl that echoed across the clearing. "Traitor King!" he bellowed, voice like grinding boulders. "You bring the runaway curse to our hearth? The moon-bound fled her duty. Now she taints you with her weakness." Murmurs rippled through the clans, betas shifting uneasily, the air thickening with the metallic tang of rising aggression. Thorn's grip tightened on Elara's hand, his body coiling like a spring. But she felt the mark surge within her, a clarion call drowning the fear. No longer hiding, she stepped forward, releasing his hand to raise her arms, the silver light erupting from her collarbone in a radiant corona that bathed the stones in ethereal glow. Visions poured from her, projected by the mark's unbound power. The schism's horrors relived, pacts torn asunder, the vampires' advance, mists swallowing villages, and a future glimpsed. Clans united under dual marks, driving back the darkness with howls of renewed strength. Grimfang lunged, claws aimed for her throat, but Thorn intercepted, their collision a thunderclap of fur and fury. The Alpha's blade met claw in a shower of sparks, the fight spilling into the dirt as packs circled, torn between loyalty and doubt. Elara channeled the energy deeper, her body trembling as the light wove barriers around the combatants, forcing a stasis that revealed truths. Grimfang's own hidden pacts with vampiric whispers, his ambition a rot undermining the throne. The revelation shattered the tension. Howls of outrage rose, turning on the betrayer. Grimfang broke free, shifting fully to beast form, but the clans converged, fangs and claws rending him in a whirlwind of justice. Blood soaked the earth, dark and final, the metallic reek mingling with the smoke of dying fires. As the dust settled, Thorn rose, bloodied but unbroken, his eyes finding Elara's amid the chaos. She had lost her hiding self, the mark's full awakening, stripping away the veils of fear, leaving her raw and radiant, the true moonbound, queen not by force, but by the power she had embraced. The sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the clearing in strokes of crimson and gold, a symbolic dawn after night's trials. Packs knelt, heads bowed, their howls rising in harmonious chorus, a rebirth forged in sacrifice. Elara stood beside Thorn, their marks aligned and steady, the impossible love between them a quiet flame amid the wild's vast embrace. Yet in her chest lingered a scar, not of flesh, but spirit, the solitude's echo, a reminder that destiny's gifts came etched in loss. As the first stars pricked the twilight, she met his gaze, silver to gold, and felt the hope take root, renewal, not in isolation, but in the unyielding bond that had seen them through the thorns. The wilds whispered of greater shadows ahead, but together they were unbreakable.